So where we left off, we're on release 2. We need to load the student's data from the CSV and create each student. Essentially, we have to create a new student instance for every row in the student CSV. So we need to create a student object from here, student object from this student all the way down. Can everyone hear me? All right, cool, thank you. All right, so with that, we need to write a method called allStudents that returns an array of student objects that represent each row in the student CSV file. All right, so here we need to create a def. Is it all students? Is that what we call it? All students. Students, invoke it. And then, here we're gonna have to open the CSV, open the CSV, read each row, create a new student object by passing in the data from the CSV into the student, student data, some student data. All right. But it says we'll define a class method. We haven't talked about class methods yet. What is a class method? Can anybody?
Well, from what I read yesterday, it's a method that it takes in the CLS for class rather than instance, and it's not an instance-specific method, I guess.
Okay, it's not an instance. Yeah, it's not an instance method. So essentially, a class method enables you to call a method without instantiating a new instance object. So before, we would put in self here and do some kind of logic, and then when we wanted to call that method, we would create a new student, student, and then pass in some information, and then in order to call the all students with an instance method, we call new student dot all students, and that's how an instance method works. But with a class method, we don't want to create a new student instance. We just want to be able to execute. We just want to be able to execute student dot all students and have it run. So with that, we can create a decorator called class method, which is a class method receives a class as implicit first argument, just like an instance method, a method receives the instance. So creates this it's literally just a decorator for developers to say, oh, this one's going to be a class method. And instead of writing self, which references the instance of this object, we're going to type in CLS, which represents for class. Anybody have any questions about? And this is all so we're able to run this all students method without having to create a new student instance.
I did have one question. I somehow managed to get it to work without, so I'm just wondering if maybe it's because it puts it in as a default. But I didn't put any arguments or any parameters in on line 17, and it still seemed to work for me. I just wanted to verify, should I put that in so that way if somebody else reads it and they're not quite catching the decorator, which they should, which is right above it, they can see that it's CLS versus self. Is it good practice to go ahead and put that in, or?
Yeah, I would put that in. Yeah, I've never tested it without it. But yeah, you should put that in.
Okay.
Cool. So within this all students class method, this is where I'm going to actually run. I'm going to copy this over. Where does it say? Loading the data. So write a method called all students. We just did. So returns an array. So at first, we're going to actually have to, I'm going to create variable with an empty array. Open, access the CSV file. And should we use the reader or a dict reader? So here we're using keyword arguments where we're going to create new students. So
because you're using the quarks, I would use the dictionary.
Yep. So use dict reader to read the file, to convert. Yeah, that makes sense. Dict reader to read the file, and then we can loop through each row in the file and next create a new student instance with what's in the row, and then append that student instance to, let's call it student array, to student array, and then returns student array. All right, so create a variable called student array, access the CSV file. Don't necessarily know, I mean, we kind of know how that works already. Use a dict reader to read the file, and then loop through each row that has an ordered dictionary of all the values in the student CSV. And then we can create a new student instance with that ordered dictionary, and then append that new student instance to the student array, and then return that array. Cool. So what's the first thing I need to do? Well, first thing I need to do is import CSV. Just to keep things, I always like to import all the built-in modules or even, import all the modules at the very top. And then if I need another, if I'm importing anything else from a different file, I put that underneath that. That's just how I do it. And all right. So with that, I can create a new method called student, or a new variable called student array, assign it to an empty array. Then access the CSV by doing open. Wait, is that how it is? Was it with open? With open. And this is where I pass in this path to that CSV file. So with open as student file, and then I can do student reader equals CSV dot dict reader, and pass in that student file. And we can, for student in student reader, I'm going to print the student. So in this all students class method, I'm creating an empty array, opening the student CSV file by passing in the path to the CSV by grabbing the absolute path and then joining it with relative to where the student is. I have to go up one level to data and then going to students CSV. So that's what the path is for. And then I'm creating a dict reader, which creates an ordered dictionary of all the values and all the columns of the CSV, and then I'm printing the student. So if I actually run, oh, yep, go ahead.
28. On line 28, you missed file and student.
Oh, thank you. Cool. So if this class method works, if I execute this file, it should run student.allStudents. I'm invoking it, and it should print every student as an ordered dictionary. So if I do Python student, there we go. And now with that, I can new student, create a student, and I can pass that ordered dictionary as a keyword argument by doing the ***, which is quargs, and I can print new student just to see what that looks like. So right now it's an ordered dictionary. Hopefully, if everything works right, it should say like a student object. See, there we go, student object. So I've got a new student instance. Now I can append that student instance to this array, the student array, append new student. And then if I return, after it loops through, I can return the student array. And let's just print that array as well. Print student array. So let's run that. There we go. So I'm going to clear it, run that again. So here is an array of student objects. Great. I don't necessarily need this new student line of code. I'm going to delete that part and just create a new instance within, just like that. It's the same thing. So I'm appending a new student, creating a new student instance right here, and I'm appending it to the student array. See if everything still works. There we go. Does anybody have any questions about how I did that?
Well, on lines 31 and 32, is it recommended to unindent them? Or, well, I guess now line 31, because that's still part of the with open. Yeah, I just wasn't sure if it, I mean, it works, but is it recommended to basically unindent and basically just keep anything that we're going to do with the file operation in its own kind of block?
No, you're right. It should be unindented. So yeah, that was just an error on my part. Yeah. So it should be like this. There we go.
I just thought this was a little weird because it's the student class calling a student class. It was just, it threw me off a little bit because I also skipped the part about the class method because I just assumed that was just a regular method.
Gotcha. And I think the first time I did this, I just created a regular method, but when you end up calling this in the instructions, like in the school init, you have to just pass in self as an argument. If it is not a class method, if it's just another instance method, you have to pass in self. So it'd still work. But
yeah, I think the other part too is I think just for him to wrap his head around the naming. If on line 29, and then of course it'd be edited in line 30. Like for me, I just put it out as line. I call that for line in data reader, or in my case, but for line in student reader. Now you're going to pass in the line as quarks on line 30.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, it's your own naming convention of how you name the variables to make it look, easier to read, I guess.
Yep. So if we're loading students, loading staff. All right, again, we are making a design decision here. So in our school, looks like in our school.py file, instead of having an empty array here, we can call student from the student class, all students, and invoke it. So up here, I need to, from student, import student. And then I'm going to have to do the same thing with staff. But let's just run this and see if I create a new school instance, just in the school py file, new school equals school Glenbard East, and then I print new school dot students. So I'm instantiating a new school instance, comes in here, comes into my init, grabs the name, Glenbard East, comes into self.students, runs the student, all students method, which I'm importing the student class up here, comes into student, and runs this, opens the CSV reader, and returns that array, which then assigns it to this self.students instance variable. So down here, when I'm printing the new school students instance variable, it should be an array of students. So we do Python school. There we go. Now we just have to do the same thing for the staff. Whoop. Could we just copy pretty much this thing over. Just got to change up a little bit of the stuff. So instead of student CSV, I want it staff CSV. And then I can do def or at class method, def all staff, CLS for class method, and then pretty much copy this in here and just change some variable names. Student array called staff array, student file, I can do staff file, student reader, I can do staff reader, and in student, I can do staff, and staff. I think that's all I really need to do to grab all the staff. Now if I go into the school and again do staff.all_staff, invoke it, I should be able to see all the staff as staff objects. If I go up once. So I've got my student objects that I'm printing out right here, as well as my staff objects. Everything works so far, but I want to be able to run my runner. So let's look here, all students. So we satisfied this. Now I want to essentially do print school.name. So I've been running everything from the actual student, staff, and school class, or from the files, but I want to be running the runner file to execute this application. So clear. I'm in my classes directory. I need to go up one level. So cd up, list everything out, and then Python runner. Oh no, everything broke, or something broke. So it says file runner line 1. Okay. from classes school, import school, from student, import student. So it says in the school.py file, line 1, from student, import student, no module found, no module named student. So in the school, but I'm in the classes directory, and student is located in the same directory as where my school file is. Does anybody know what the issue is?
The path is relative to the file you're running. So the runner is one level above.
Yeah.
But you actually have to do classes dot student there.
Yeah, this is where Python is like confusing. Is that it gets the files relative to what file I'm running. So I'm running it on like the main directory. So when I run this runner file, it essentially executes every single file, but it executes it from like relative to where the runner is. So I have to essentially change classes.student, classes.staff, and let's see if that works. Nope, no module name person. So up here, where's the student? So I have to do the same thing with the person class. Classes. Now if I run it, there it works. But okay, so it works, but say I want to go back and do some testing and I want to create a new student because I'm doing some kind of student testing. And, let's see if I can do this. I don't want to like have Tom or name. Tom. Age 88. What else is there? Role. What I'm trying to get at is if I decide to go and execute this file directly from the student, clear. So if I decide to go CD into classes and execute the student, oh geez. It's going to give me an error. From classes.import person, it says no module name classes. So that means I'm going to have to go up here and delete this again to actually execute it. So yeah, there is an expected error, but it would work otherwise. So just be sure you know where you're running your files from, like what directory, because you're going to have to like change where it's being imported from a lot if you end up doing that. So when in doubt, just continue running, test your application by just executing the runner file, and change some code in there to get what you want. So if I wanted to anyway. Does anybody have any questions about?
Yeah, Tom, is now a good time to talk about decorators? It's a new word to me. Or is that coming?
So this is pretty much the only time we'll be covering decorators. You won't see it that much going forward. It just enables you, it like changes the functionality of the class, whether it's a class, a method, or other attributes. It kind of like extends the functionality of it. But yeah, the class method decorator is literally, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but isn't a decorator just an indication to other developers that that method is a class method or a static method or other
I think Python's doing something with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a decorator in Python is a function that wraps another function. It like the decorator will be the one that returns the return of the function it's wrapping. So if you thought recursion was hard, decorators get a little bit complex. I mean, they're not too hard once you make one yourself, but they are actually doing something. They're not just.
We do cover them a little bit later in the curriculum again. We do revisit them at some point, but we don't take a deep dive.
Yeah, as